Joe, my first question to you is, as part of the process, is it important to write every day, even if you're not feeling it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think a writing process or a writing schedule of some sort is really important. And I don't write every day. Before I had kids, I wrote just about every day. And then kids come along and you really want the weekend to be the weekend, spend some time. And so I try to write every weekday. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes stuff gets in the way, but I try to write every day in the morning, a couple hours. And I often tell my students, it's about, like anything you care about, you want to hold it close. And so you keep it close each day. And even if it doesn't mean a lot of time, half hour here or there, that still matters. And it just keeps you acquainted with it, keeps it easier to get back in. So at least for me, those big stretches where you're not writing, it's tougher to get back in. I feel that turbulence when I'm coming back to the work.
So it's more of like it's out of necessity almost, so that it's kind of getting routine. But so you will force it if you have to?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean,
really?
There's when it doesn't feel, awesome. And then I go to something else. If I'm working on a project and it feels I'm struggling, I go to something else. I write poems, and so you can always turn to the poem and tinker with that for a little bit, play around with that, or even just sitting down and doing some journaling, getting some ideas down. That's all good stuff, even if the sort of the forward movement on a project isn't happening that day.
Yeah. BJ, I interviewed a songwriter last week who said absolutely not to force it, because when he forces it, things get derivative. That he finds that's when the cliches start to happen. So how do you feel about that? Do you think it's important to push through even when you're not feeling it?
I write every day. Like I wake up and do my pages.
Yeah.
But it's also one of those things, like I can tell within like 15 minutes of writing, like whether or not it's going to be like a fruitful day or whether it's going to be me just like throwing shit at the wall for an hour. And like I try not to force it, because I really do think that that is when you become, it's not creative at that point. It's like if the muse is going to open up and let you grab something that day, you're going to know early on. If not, you tend to fall in that you're not saying anything special when you're sitting there trying to force it. But usually I happen upon that creative, that really great line or that really great idea when I'm not expecting it. That's why I enjoy running every day, is for some reason, every time and driving long distances does the same thing for me. Like my brain cuts off in a way to where like I'm only focused on, okay, let's keep this car on the road. Yeah. And my brain can kind of get away from the monotony of my day. Same way with running. After about a quarter of a mile, my brain starts looking for something other than like, man, my leg hurts, my foot hurts, my knee hurts. Like your brain tries to just get away from what you're doing. And that's when everything floods. That's when I have to stop the car, and jot down something on the notepad or record a voice memo. That's where like 90% of my stuff comes from these days, is either long drives or on my runs.
I think one of the things, I find the same thing. And the writer David Gessner says he does his best writing when he takes a walk. When you get up, I love the excuse of going out and watering the garden or something like that real quick, just letting the brain switch off or move to something else. One of the things I often do when I'm having one of those days when things aren't working is stop trying to write a poem or stop trying to write a story, and just listen to the language, play with the language, the music of the language. If you get right down to the root of things, and that too, I find often tricks the conscious mind or whatever it is into just shutting off that goal or that urge for story or maybe song or whatever it is, and just following the language and seeing what happens. And that's that moment of discovery often for me. Suddenly I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I've been trying to say the whole time. Or that's something that I can hold on to right there.
So Joe, I'm interested in, your work as a poet also. How do you decide, when does the urge to write poetry strike? And how do you know if something is a poem or it's maybe a story? How do you decide which genre? Because you write in those different genres. How do you decide which one fits?
it often starts from something small, an image, a bit of dialogue over here from someone talking to somebody else, um, an idea that I'm interested in. So it's something small, and I know I don't know where I'm going with it. I know I'm interested in it. I just want to play around with it, right, and shape it and look at it and dig into it on the page. And a story is almost always starts with a character, a situation. So I'm seeing movement already, versus a poem just feels like sort of uncovering or unlayering, and a story feels like I'm going somewhere. Like I'm not always sure exactly where, but I feel like I'm already on the move.
I interviewed, this is probably 10 years ago, Lee Young Lee, one of my favorite poets of all time. He said he felt the impulse to write a poem one time when he saw the outline of he and his wife's, of the outline of their body in the rumpled sheets of the bed in the morning. And I thought, that to me, like, I see a rumple, I think that bed needs to be made. He saw outlines of bodies, and that became the impetus for a poem. And I thought, that's the difference between me and poets, right? Is they see those images in things that most of us don't see, right?
And the other thing, I think, speaking about process, and I imagine it's the same way as a songwriter, BJ, but the more you do that, poetry is also a way of paying attention, a way of being in your own world, right? And the more you do it, I've found, the more I pay attention, the more I'm sort of open to seeing those things and understanding the metaphorical implications, or understanding that there's something there beyond just what's there. So I don't think that's just, maybe it's a different level and different folks, but I don't think it's just something that's wholly natural. I think it's also something you practice and you slowly develop.
Yeah, it's definitely like the power of observation is definitely like my superhero trait. Like it's you don't realize that that's what songwriting is until much later. It took me well into my 30s to realize that all I'm doing is making observations, processing said observations, and then translating into a 3-minute story that is easily palatable. Like it's and as I get older, I always talk about the muse and this imaginary thing. It's the closest I'll ever become. When I talk about like that part of the process, it's the only time I get spiritual. And at first, you think that like once you start writing songs, that it's like you've unlocked this door to another portal, and you think it's unlimited. But then you realize that like it only comes around every now and then. And the older you get and the longer you do it, you learn to realize when that storm is brewing and how to catch as much rain as possible. So it used to be, I took it for granted. I would just write a song, oh, that was great. Like, that's really good. Like, I could probably just do that again tomorrow. And then you learn that, like, when the muse is getting ready to give you something, like, that little hole opens up. And, like, now before that hole opens up, I know exactly where I need to be, what mindset I need to be in. Pen and paper ready, guitar in hand. I'm like, give me what you got. And it's just about making those observations. And again, like when I was 18, I wasn't paying attention to the rumpled sheets and the outline in the bed. But you better believe as you get older and anytime, it's a craft. And, when I first started doing my craft, I was a novice. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what to look for. I was trying to make cabinets out of wood. And now I'm very selective in the wood I use. I'm very selective in the process that I build the cabinets. And that just comes from 15 years of doing it wrong. Learning, holy shit, like there's a better way to do this. There's a better way to say this. And that's all that is my observation. Like I've always been good at making observations. I just know which observations are worth chasing down the rabbit hole now, and which observations are just like, oh, that bed needs to be made.
Absolutely.
Are there certain places you go, BJ? Like you're thinking, this place would be good for an observation or two.
I get it from people. A lot of the stuff comes from just people, like a bunch of the assholes that I know from like back home. And I can either write as said asshole, or I can write opposed to said asshole. And so a lot of my songs come from either running from the type of person I would have been if I had stuck around my hometown, or either trying to get in their head and understand how the hell can someone think that, and trying to put myself back to where I was in that tiny town and trying to approach it with empathy. So like my observations either come from the character that I put myself into or their firsthand observations. And I've found observations like from something that was written on, like my last record, the name of my last record. A lot of people think it was like a biblical reference, or that, you know, I was making this grand statement. It came off a fucking Airbnb bathroom wall. Like some lady had it written in like live, laugh, love font, but it was like a, it was a Bible verse, and it was a Bible verse from Lamentations, but I wasn't taken aback by the Bible verse. I was taken back by the word and how rare I see it used in language. And it made me like free fall into where can this word be applicable and how many different ways can I break this word apart and put it to something else. So Lamentations became the theme of the record, not because I had this profound idea of writing a record that thematically represented the struggles we go through during the human experience. It came because I was taking a piss and I saw a word that I don't see every day in writing. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, I don't ever do that. I don't ever, and while I'm in the bathroom, look and read and be like, you know what, that's going to be a really great record for my biggest selling record today. But it just so happened that like that day, that word caught me and I knew what to do with it. I knew exactly, my brain took a single word and turned it into 10 separate songs, which then turned into an album that thematically represented this much bigger social statement. And it all came from a single word, shittily written in a bathroom in Little Rock, Arkansas.
I've been thinking about the me and mine part of that from the song, BJ, just listening to it a lot the last couple of months. And how I've seen that before, as you say, you've seen it before and maybe not paid attention, but hearing it in your song, it's just been knocking around my mind, that idea of me and mine and what the boundaries are of that and what the limits are of that and how we define that, especially folks, I think kinds of places we grew up in, rural spaces, and how we're trying to stretch against the borders of that, perhaps now in our lives. So that's been something I'm thinking about. I don't know if there's going to be a poem that falls out of it, but I've been carrying that phrase around a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And again, going back to the book, it's fantastic. And it was one of those things where I saw so much of myself in Jillian, like, you know, being the progressive from the tiny towns that move away. And me and my wife have done 46 of the national parks. So it's like reading like Big Bend and Key West. I'm just like, this book is hitting way too many like highlights of my life. Like it's really weird. And about how, you know, going back to the places that you kind of ran from for a long time and trying to find some sense of place and finding and fitting in as a new puzzle piece when you left because you weren't a puzzle piece that fit in, and coming back and trying to find a place to fit in. And that's all Me and Mine's about. Me and Mine's about a guy who voted one way in 2016, and then when 2020 rolled around, he had completely wondered what the hell was he thinking. Like, you know, it's a new version of the snake oil medicine stories. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the man, I really thought I believed in this stuff, and now I'm starting to see the cracks in the story. I'm starting to see the holes in what I believe, and trying to, you know, I think that's the best part of being a human being, is not just being right all the time, but being wrong and learning from being wrong, or being proven wrong and being able to accept the fact, okay, based on these new facts, I've been living my life wrong. I'm going to now take these facts, apply them to my current life, and then change my perspective. Like, that's the beautiful thing that I don't think a lot of people these days are willing to do. And I think your book is a great representation. And I think that you spoke a lot about small town. You showed the good in people that sometimes get lost now that we're, you know, the country's split into 2 teams.
Yeah.
A lot of times we lose, we just look at what color hat they're wearing, and we don't look at the fact that they're still humans and they're still making these decisions every day that lead to these ultimate moments.
Yeah.
And it was really, really awesome to see you kind of inject some humanity in people that I think a lot of, especially progressive, college educated Southerners have thought is lacking in the other side, I guess. It was nice for us to see a guy that probably votes different than I do, that wakes up every morning and does extremely hard manual labor every day. For you to humanize that in a way that it was truly special. I'm not to blow smoke or anything, but it was a really special read.
Well, yeah, I mean, really, what you talked about that moment where people maybe start to see the cracks in the stories they've been given, right? And we're all given stories by where we're born and who our folks are and who's around us, and and I wanted to write something where someone is looking at those stories and realizing that they're not working, right? That they're not working anymore, and not just to say on one side of that political divide. I wanted folk, the Jillian and some of the other characters, to start to reckon with some of the stories they've been told too, and the ways that those might not be working, might not be big enough to contain everyone's humanity, and so that's what I wanted as characters, to be able to get to that point and see at least that those cracks are there. And even Verl, sort of the third main character, he doesn't really walk through to the other side, but he sees that the cracks are there. He sees that his world isn't what he thought it was by the end. So
how did this book start, Joe?
Well, I was teaching Laura Welty's short story, Where's the Voice Coming From? It was great. BJ, you talked about trying to write in the voices of your idiot friends, and trying to write with empathy. And, she tells the story of that short story of being in New York, and, she's from Mississippi, and she hears that Medgar Evers has been murdered. And her first thought, at least in the interview that she says, I know who did it, right? Like, I don't know exactly who did it, but I know the kind of person who did it because he's my people. He's someone I would have known. And I was teaching that short story in 2009, in 2008, 2009, as we're electing Obama, as the first, first wolf tags are being drawn in the state of Montana, and trying to consider, and seeing the rise of so many reactionary groups almost immediately after Obama's elected, and trying really hard to think like, oh gosh, the folks I knew growing up, I know they're pissed off and angry, and I don't understand why, and I want to try to figure out, why. Why would someone do this? And so I started writing Verl's voice first. He's the one who kills the wolf and then runs, and trying to just follow him and see what happens. And so that was a short story that was published, and then a friend read the short story and really liked it, and he was like, "Where's the rest of the book?" Like, I don't know. There's no book. It's just a short story. And he's like, "Oh no, there's a whole book there." So I started to think about, okay, he's done what he's done, and who has to then reap sort of the wind of what's happened. And so I latched on to Wendell and Jillian and Maddie and Rowdy, and slowly started to build the rest of the book around them.
What was that process like? How linear was that process for you? Chronologically, I guess.
Yeah. I write pretty chronologically, like I kind of start in the beginning and slowly move through the middle to the end. But I wish I was a writer who could plan it all out. I just am not able to do that. I sort of see sort of like headlights in the dark. Like I see just enough of the road to keep going, but I don't know what's a little past that, and so I kind of have to discover it as I go. And some characters who I thought were going to be kind of bigger parts of the book in the beginning didn't end up being as big, and some did become fuller parts of the book. And so it was just seeing a little bit ahead. And it's often, again, listening to the characters, sort of thinking about who they are as you get to know them even more fully, and understanding what's going to happen for them next, or what they're going to do next.
So my favorite ritual story ever is I interviewed Anthony Doerr. Again, this was like before All the Light We Cannot See came out. I think he was writing it when we actually talked. So this is before he had kind of blown up. And that book is amazing, by the way. Wedges of Wet Sun.
I literally just looked up on my shelf and saw it. I was like, man, yeah, this is great.
Wedges of wet sunlight to describe the peaches in the bowl, to me, is one of the greatest images I've ever read. Like wedges of wet sunlight when he's describing the breakfast, I think, that she's eating, and it's describing the peaches. Anyway, the story he told me that I love, and this has to do with ritual, is he grew up in Idaho. Or no, sorry, I think he grew up there. He lives there now.
He lives there now. I think he grew up in the Midwest. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. But he lived in New York. And when he was first writing, he lived in a walk-up and it was insanely loud. And so to write, he had to wear construction grade ear protection to block out all the noise. So then they moved out to Boise with his family, and he still has to wear that ear protection, even though there's no sound, because it's a part of his ritual. And it's like a lack of confidence without it. And he says he doesn't realize he's wearing them until he goes to the bathroom and sees himself in the mirror. But that's a part of his process, even though he does not need that ear protection. So do you have a ritual? Are there things you have to have with you? Like for me, and then I'll shut up. But I guess for me at least, there's a certain chair, because for whatever reason, the mojo has been there before. So why not? But how important is that specific ritual to you?
Just thinking about that image, I would just want to talk about it just a little bit, because it's so good. You're right. And I love how it's visual, which the whole book is about, right? What we can and cannot see and the ways we fail in our sight. But it's also tactile, wedges of wet sunlight. So, just like the main character, who loses her sight, has to feel her way through the world. So, so much of the book, right? In that one image. Yeah, he's amazing. I think my ritual is just about sitting down every morning with a cup of coffee, and I start. I don't know if I have it near me. I always start with pad and pen, and just with just listing stuff out. And it's sort of a low stakes way to get going. Just things my kids have said to me. I was just looking back, and I look back at these journals, and my son about 3 years ago. He and I wrote this, I don't know when he asked me, but I wrote it down in my journal probably the next day. And he says, "Dad, how long can a person hold their breath?" I was like, "Well, not too long, handful of couple dozen seconds, maybe a little longer if they've really practiced." And he's like, what if they open their mouth really big and catch all the wind? How long then?" And I haven't done anything with that, but it's really fun to look back and think like, oh man, yeah, what if you catch all the wind in your mouth? So I just saw that today, so I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
But I start there, and then it often for me is a process of trying to split time between revision and drafting. So working, revising, and I spend a lot of time in revision, really, really trying to sharpen things up, and then moving to drafting some new stuff, trying to get another 200 words, 250 words. But it's coffee, pen and paper. If I can sit outside in the morning, I like to. Can't always, depending on the weather. It rains a lot here in the winter. But I don't have too much besides that. I have switched back and forth where before kids I wrote at home, and then kids showed up and I started writing at my office on campus. And then just lately I've started writing at home again, partly because of the pandemic, and partly the kids are old enough that they don't need something from you every 10, 15 minutes. They can kind of disappear and do their own thing for a little bit. So I can more easily work at home. But besides that, I don't have too much, there's no special pen or chair or I'm trying to think.
Do you have a goal as far as pages or words, or just write till the well is dry?
I write. I think I'm like BJ. I schedule my day out, so I write till I either go play pickup basketball or go on a run. So that's I write till one of those two things till I run out of time, basically. But I do try. I really try hard, because I would spend more time in revision. I try hard to force myself to give at least an hour, maybe, if not more, to writing new stuff. Whether that's working on the next novel or working on a new poem or something.
Speaking of Anthony Doerr, I think the other thing he told me in the interview is I asked him about writer's block, and he called writer's block. He didn't believe in it. He called it a failure of courage. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I'd love to talk about this, because I find some people think it's a myth.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think we talked about this a little bit, and BJ, you talked about it a little bit, thinking about the muse, and I'm with Tony Doerr on this one. I don't believe in it, but I also think there are days when it's harder, when it's tougher. Yeah. And for me, those are the days I try to just turn to something else, right? When it's not working on this, I turn to this. but I do agree that the trouble with that myth is that if you give it too much power, it's true, right? Like any myth, it becomes true in your life. And so I often have students will be like, "Oh, I just haven't been able to write for 2 weeks." And I was like, "No, it's not that you haven't been able to write. You haven't written for 2 weeks. That's how we got to rephrase. Tomorrow you're going to write." And so giving that myth too much power means it will take all the power you want to give it. So
yeah, that's probably what he's talking about, right? But BJ, sorry. Because...
Oh, no worries. I was going to say, like, that's the thing is I've always looked at it as writers write.
Yeah.
And if you wake up every morning and you write, it doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be keeper. It doesn't have to be anything that anybody is ever going to see. Writers write. Like, even if I love how you told the story of writing down the kind of, the beautiful nonsensical thing children say. I have I guess an opposite generational, like I write down a lot of the shit my dad says, or like a lot of the stuff that like just the random, like the old people way of telling stories, or making like just these like very like very Southern ways of saying something. And I tend to, every time I'm hanging out with him, I catch my phone out and he thinks I'm texting somebody or something, but I'm just in a notepad writing down. Like just like trying to see the world through his eyes, trying to see the world through a man who has never left the state of North Carolina, not even on vacation, like doesn't leave, has never left like within like an hour of where he's from, like, and he has such a different worldview of me, and it's like twice as long. And I think it's truly, so I catch myself writing that a lot, but like I tell people, anybody who tells me, "Oh man, I got writer's block, I haven't written," I'm like, you don't have writer's block, you just haven't written anything good. Like there's a huge difference, because if you just stop writing because you think you have writer's block, there's no way to break that. And again, I think it's only powerful if you let it be powerful. Like if you give it a name and you turn your back from it and you blame everything on it, then yes, it becomes very real. But I've never met like a real writer, like a writer, either a novelist or a songwriter that I really look up to, that has ever given it as much as just a kind of a smirk and saying like Santa Claus isn't real. It's that kind of situation. It's like, it's only real if you believe in it. Because, and I used to use it as an excuse. I used to let it get in the way of me doing what I was put on this earth to do. But the minute you kind of laugh it off as a childish name for laziness or a childish name for procrastination, then it doesn't have any power anymore. You look it in the eye and you call it what it is. It's like, you're an excuse I'm making because I haven't written anything good in a week. And once you do that, I think that you can really overcome. Once you kind of make it into something that's conquerable, like it's like, why were you ever afraid of the dark? It's like, oh, you don't have any control over what I really do.
Yeah.
Like, don't call it today a wash just because you didn't write something. You can call it a victory because you saw something you wrote and found out it wasn't very good. Like I think that's just as important as writing the next great one-liner, is realizing the one-liner you already wrote's not that good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before you let it seep out into the world and then everybody makes fun of you.
Yeah. We talked earlier about, what are the things that lead you to those observations. And for me, often it's travel and it's getting out into the natural world. So doing some fly fishing, doing some hiking, or just driving around. I was last week out near La Grande, Oregon, teaching in the low residency MFA program there. And I stayed out in a little town called Somerville at an Airbnb, and just the drive between La Grande and Somerville, down through these fields and watching hawks fly over. But then of course all the rivers are dry because all the water's pulled out for irrigation. And just driving, I know some stuff is going to come out of that, just driving those roads. And so just seeing other landscapes and observing them is one of the big places where writing for me comes from.
Interesting. You say, something's going to come out of it, right? So how do you know? I guess I thought that's a great comment, because it's, that it's going to happen, but when, right? You don't know what, but you just know something's going to come. How do you, that's the mystery of it, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And, it might be sort of shifted. Something might be shifted into fiction land, or it might occasion a poem. There was this great little store and tavern there, the Somerville store. Stopped there a couple times, and that might just be the title of the next poem. I'm not sure. Somerville store and tavern. We'll see.
But I do hear that, BJ from Songwriters as well. And, something's going to come of this. I don't know what it is, rather than like, oh, I need to write that down. It's more of, I just saw that happen. Something's going to come of this. I just don't know when.
Yeah.
Right?
It's funny because that kind of stuff, it either hits you immediately or it comes up when you least expect it.
Mm-hmm.
Either you sit down, you're okay, Somerville store. That's what I'm writing right now. Or it's something that when you need a descriptive paragraph, like a segue, it's funny how when you see something and you tell yourself like, man, I need to really take notes of this stuff. It's funny when you come back to it, you like, especially when you do what we do, when you literally make a living off describing things to other people that haven't seen it and describe it good enough to where they can see it.
Yeah.
It's crazy how you can just go back and again, it might end up as the title of a poem, or it might be a throwaway paragraph to get you into the next scene change, but it will be descriptive, and you can I guarantee whether you write it today or whether you write it a year from now, because I know I can do it, and I know that you can do it. You can go directly back into the driver's seat of the car.
Yeah.
It's like one of those movies to where you can like flash back and like take over your body in the previous self, and you can smell what was in the air, and just what color green the grass was, and you remember exactly which way the river cut and how close it was to the road. And if you stop 2 or 3 times to see something, like, it's crazy how like most people would drive that road and be like, wow, that was pretty. And then if you ask them to describe it a year and a half later, they'd be like, oh, it was pretty. But when writers, whether it be novelists or poets or songwriters, if you ask me to describe it a year and a half later, I'm going to tell you it's going to take me 3 minutes to describe it to you. And it's going to be, I'm going to tell you what I smelled and what I saw and what I heard. And I think that's the blessing and the curse of what we do, because when you're writing about something like nature, it's awesome. But take that same observation skill and apply it to trauma.
Yeah.
Apply it to a divorce. Apply it to losing a child. Apply it to real shit. Not just, oh man, that's pretty.
Yeah.
But something that somebody describes as that emotionally decimated me as a person. Imagine what writers do with that. Like, you can take, a lot of people get hurt when they lose their mom. Yeah. Like, I'm writing an entire record about it. And it's extremely hyper sensitive. It's extremely hyper descriptive. Mm-hmm. And so like that's the blessing and the curse, I think, of being really good at observing things, is when it's just a pretty landscape. Yeah, I can recall it to you. I can tell you. But where we really cash in on the human experience isn't the pretty stuff. Yeah. It's looking at the ugly stuff and putting it into words, putting into words what loss is.
Yeah.
Putting into words what trauma is. That's where we all, like, the descriptive stuff in this book was fantastic. The stuff that punched me in the throat was the human elements of it. Yeah. Because when you're able to take an emotion and dissect it enough to write 230 some pages about it, like, that's the blessing and the curse. That's where, like, I can't imagine how hard it was, how much personal stuff you had to draw back on to write that. But I also, like, it's awesome to put it down, and then it's like, Will Ferrell in Old School, you wake up and you're like, well, what just happened? Like, how did that come out of me? Because you read back, like I do it with songs, and I'm sure you do it with poems and paragraphs. You'll read back over something and be like, oh wow, like, there's no way that, like, my dumb ass came up with that. Like, that came from another world, that came from another dimension, and I was lucky enough to be the conduit. I was lucky enough to be the thing that transcribed it. It's special, and I think it's funny when people talk about, like, because the average music listener, when you tell them like any story, they're like, man, you should write a song about that, man. and I'm sure, I don't know if other writers get it as much as songwriters get it, but like if I post something like, man, had the best pancakes ever this morning, there's always some jackleg on the internet. It's like, man, you should write a song about them pancakes. You should write a song about it. And I'm like, what do you think we do? I'm just waiting for morning pancakes to infiltrate my like daily routine and work itself into a song somehow, so that random Twitter follower is like, man, I know it was coming. I remember 4 years ago when you wrote about them pancakes, man.
I think I was thinking about so for a long time, my kids listened to the music I told them they should listen to, and that was great. And I felt like I'd really, I'd got this fathering thing down. And now they're getting old enough that they're starting to listen to their own stuff too. But I always used to tell them like sad songs are the best songs. Like it's proven that's true. Sad songs are the best songs. But I was trying to get them to listen to things I like, but I also really believe it. I mean, I think, there is an emotional catharsis. There's a reason tragedy speaks to us, because we can move back into those emotions. And I find the same thing sometimes as a writer, BJ. I don't know if you do too, but when you're writing those things that are about loss, about trauma, about great struggle, it's both a sadness, there's sorrow there too, but there's sorrow and sadness there, but there's also a purgation, a gaining a modicum of control or understanding over something that is sometimes loss doesn't make any sense. It just is. But it feels like in the writing, or at least in the attempt, that there's a gaining of a bit of some kind of hold on it, right?
Yeah,
Something you grab on.
I try to equate that. Like I tell people when I'm writing it, I'm looking at it face to face. But by the end of it, I'm hovering above it.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when I'm writing about personal loss, like I'm in the moment, I'm writing very much, but by the end of it, I'm hoping, even if it's a third verse or chorus or a bridge, I'm hoping to gain that perspective of that I'm writing as someone who, like, as the narrator watching it happen, instead of, I try to put distance in myself while I'm writing the song, or at least by the time I'm performing it every night for the next decade.
Sure.
You have that space to where you're not that close to the monster every night, because that's a dangerous place to be. That's where your addicts come from. That's where your emotionally destitute people come from. But I think it's important to be able to hover. You use the word perspective, and I think perspective is such a important part of what we do, because if I'm writing a breakup song, very rarely do I like have a breakup or a loss and immediately write about it.
Oh yeah.
Because you have zero perspective on it. You're like, it turns out usually it's just like rambling, non-rhyming diatribe that's yelling.
Yes, a big scream.
It's just a big like angry or frustrated like ah.
Yeah.
But when you can somehow find a way to kind of pull yourself up and look at the situation, not just as your situation, but as a situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a lot easier to write honestly, and I think it's a lot easier to write in a way that is going to affect more people than just you. Mm-hmm. I think journal writing is very much confrontational, face to face, screaming. I think when you're writing for any kind of audience, whether it's an audience of 10 people in a peer writing group, or if it's people that are going to buy your record or buy your book, I think it's important to try to make sure you have that perspective, because the perspective is what allows a lot of people into the trauma, into the loss, into the pain.
Yeah.
And when you can write with perspective instead of just writing about it like this close, that's where you have success, because you're taking enough of yourself out of it, but leaving enough of yourself in it to where it's believable, but taking enough of yourself out of it to where it's relatable. And I think that's extremely important.